In this video, we're going to look at some of Excel's logical functions. Now, this is a small sampling, but they're very, very useful in particular. So, in the previous video, we looked at how to get comments associated with maybe an overall average using vertical lookup. But we're going to look at that now with an if statement. So, an if statement lets you compare criteria and then return either a value if it's true or a value if it's false. So you can see it's referred to as a logical test here. So let's try that. So if this value is greater than let's say 85. So if that's true, if the value is true, we're going to display good job. But if it's not true, we're going to say study more. Okay, so if the value in the cell is greater than 85, you're going to put good job, otherwise study more. And that's a good job. But as you copy it down, you can see some of them are study more. There you go, anything below 85. Now that's great, but what happens if you want to do something a little more complex or a little more nuanced? Well, one option would be to use a vertical or horizontal lookup table. That's true. But another thing about if statements is these can be nested or put inside each other. So let's change this criteria to say 75. So if it's greater than 75, we're going to say, if it's greater than 75, we're going to say study more. And if it's lower than 75, we're going to say see me. Now, I don't see any see me's, so let's make one of these averages a 65. And there you go. Now that's great, but do we really need to tell the student has a 91 or here a 99 in this case that they need to study more? Probably not. So what we can do is we can take this if statement and just drop it into another if statement. Let's start out by doing this in two stages, although we don't have to. So I'm going to say equals if this value is greater than, let's say, 85. If it is, just say good job. And now the false value. So if that's not true, do this whole thing right in here. So it is greater than 85. That's a good job. And you can see there are a couple of good jobs here. And that allows you to test more than two conditions by nesting them essentially. Now, I didn't have to do this in two stages like this. It was just kind of easier to keep straight in my head. This J2 is really equal to everything that's in J2. So the more concise way of doing it would be to take this actual formula and plug it in where we reference J2 here, because they're exactly the same thing. The only thing we have to do is take out that equal sign, because equal sign is only once. So basically it's saying if it's greater than 85, good job. And if it's not, run another if statement that sees if it's greater than 75. If it is, study more. If it's not, see me. And you can see that that formula does exactly the same thing and makes that other column unnecessary. And you can actually nest if statements at least 7 deep. Now, at that point, you might want to consider doing something like a lookup table, but just know that you can do it if it's necessary. The other thing to consider is that this criteria here doesn't always have to be the same. You can test for one thing, and then if it either is or is not true, you can start testing for other things. Usually it's better to nest your statements on the failure part. In other words, if it's not true, then you do another test of some type. Okay, so let's get out of there. Now, there's also an if error option. And let me just take this. So this is averaging this out, and let's just say that for some reason it comes up with an error. You can simply reference the cell and ask if it's an error. Oh, I'm sorry. This formula wants me to give you a value to display if it is an error. So let's just say bad calculation. And since there is an error in this cell, that's what will be displayed. Now, if there's not an error in there, it will just display the contents of the cell itself. There are 3 other functions we can look at in the logical functions, and that's AND, or not. And let's look at those briefly. I'm going to close those down a bit to get some more room. Okay, the other thing is, let's get rid of that so that our data is good. And I think I'm going to even clean up this if error, since we don't need it anymore. Okay, let's see. Equals AND. The first logical we're going to ask is, if this cell is equal to M. So in other words, if the student happens to be a boy, and the grade happens to be greater than or equal to 85, which in this case it is, it will return true. So this is basically just a test to see if 2 or more criteria are true. This is a boy, it is greater than 85, therefore you get a value of true. This is a female, a girl, so automatically it was false because of my test. And the same for this one, and the same for this one, because although it was a boy, he did not exceed the 85 points. So it's just a logical test, and you can then go on to, do something else. Say if that cell did come out as true, then say, I don't know, good boy, else don't do anything, leave it blank. And I can do that. I can put a quote with nothing between it and a quote, and that's what I'll get. So I get a good boy there, and that's identified the boys who, I've already identified them here, but I just using another statement to refer to that just allows me a little more flexibility in what is going to be displayed. Now again, if you want to get fancy, you can take this type of thing and build it right in to this formula over here to display it right in this place instead. Okay, but not necessary, but something you can do as you get more comfortable. Now, if I were to change that to, let me come back to this formula, instead of and, we were to make this an or, that's going to change the dynamics a little bit. What that's saying now is that either of these two things can be true. So in this case, either the value in here is male, in which case it's automatically true, or the value is greater than 85. So one of those two things can now be true, and this will come up. And obviously it doesn't make as much sense. My message isn't here and isn't aligned with the boy students, and also there's probably no reason to do this test. But you can see that if you do have one of two things or one of three things that would make something valid, you can use this OR function. And the last function we're going to look at today is the NOT function. And basically that just tests to see that a condition is not true. So let's do a very simple one here just to show how it works. So equals not okay, so this is testing to see if the value in this cell is not male. And since it is male, the answer is false. In this case, the value is not male, and that's true, as it is in this case, etc. So just different ways to test out values in some cells, and it's going to return either true or false. The and, or not are all going to return true or false. And from that true or false, you can do other things with the data.